Here we go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And at the time of this recording, to those watching, to those online right now, Happy New Year. Welcome to 2024. So grateful for the opportunity to continue season number 3 of the PWP Sessions podcast. I am your host, Noelle Figueroa. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode. Tonight, I have the honor and the privilege of interviewing another fellow poet by the name of Yetvart S. Majian. He also goes by Ed, and I'm looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to another awesome conversation. Thank you all so much for your time and attention. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with this podcast, the PWP Sessions or the Poets for Purpose Sessions podcast is a podcast that I created where I interview new or established authors of poetry, rappers, or MCs. I feature a performance of their work along with an audience Q&A session. I'm your host, Noelle Figueroa. I am a poet, author, blogger, workshop facilitator, and event host, and I am the creator of the PWP Sessions podcast. Now, tonight's guest is Yetvart S. Majian, and this is his bio. Yetvart, or Ed S. Majian, pronouns are he or him, is an Armenian-American poet, the inaugural poet in residence at Washington Park, and a Sifu teacher in the Chinese martial arts tradition, synthesizing Wing Chun, Tai Chi, and Zen meditation at Thorn Blossom Kung Fu. With experience and legacies of collective trauma, Yetvart's poetry touches identity, social justice, and the subtleties of human experience. He's been a featured speaker on topics of genocide, healing, and political organizing. Since rededicating himself to poetry and community in 2022, his poetry has appeared in Somme, the Journal of the Kairos Peace Community, Soup Can Magazine, and he's been a featured poet at readings on both sides of the Hudson River. Yetvart is the founder, facilitator of Union City, New Jersey's weekly open mic and safe space open forum, The Poetry Unfold. His forthcoming debut, Made from Recycled Materials, focus on masculine vulnerability and healing. A separate chapbook focuses on mass conflict and the inheritance of fractured national and historic identities. And you can find them on Instagram @E_Majian. Now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, here is Yetvart S. Majian. Yetvart, good evening. What's up, man? How you doing? Welcome to the show.
It's such a pleasure to see you, Noel, and also all the beautiful faces. Hi, it's so good to be here. I'm well.
Excellent, excellent. So I'm going to start off with a basic question. Who is Yetvart S. Majian? Like, how would you describe yourself or define yourself?
Oh gosh. Well, it's funny, after hearing my bio, I feel like I'm stuck in a rut. Like I'm just gonna read my bio back again. Yetvart is definitely a person with multiple identities. I grew up in a Latino community in the United States, although I was raised by Armenian grandparents, so I'm very much rooted. I see myself as a thinker. I was a performing magician, so I would say that I'm also a person who loves magic in the world. And I believe in, I believe in the magic and mystery of life, but also in hard work and due diligence. So I don't know. I hope that's a good enough answer for now. Maybe we'll find out more.
Definitely, definitely. Now everybody started off poetry different. Starts off in poetry differently. Like, what's your poetry story? Like, how did you get started?
I was thinking about that. I just want to shout out to like so many of the incredible guests you've had on this show. To you, I think you're, like I told you before we started, I think you're doing such a service to the poetry community. And I heard you ask that question, and I told myself not to overthink, right? And to see what I felt when you asked personally to me. And I think right now what's coming to me is that my first writing ever was, gosh, okay. So I don't want to go too deep into it, but I had a pretty turbulent childhood. So I was raised by grandparents because both of my parents were very complex personalities. One of them is still alive. And so I think that the first memories I have of writing was probably in the single digits. I went to Armenian school until second grade, so I was pretty competent in the Armenian alphabet.
Mhm.
And my dad would take me over for visitation rights to his side of the family, where I was treated pretty poorly. And I have this recollection of writing how I was feeling in little scraps of paper to my grandmother. So I'll stop there, but I think the point that I'm trying to get at is that for me, writing immediately was a matter of creating a safe space for myself. I would write to document, I would write to feel safe in unsafe environments. And that's my very first memory of writing. And then I've been writing poetry since like my teenage years, my early teens, high school. And it's always been in some way a way of asking questions and communicating with the universe and the world around me.
Mhm. Right, right, excellent. And when you got to a place where you started, taking your writing more seriously, what were the first subjects you started addressing in your writing in the beginning?
Um, I think I started doing my most serious writing in the latter part of healing from a really, really bad breakup, probably about 7 or 8 years ago. I had been writing more political writing and things of that nature prior to that. I studied politics and philosophy, and I always wrote poetry on the side.
Mhm.
But I think writing became a really, really important way of bearing witness to myself at the end of a really difficult breakup that left me very destabilized for the first time in my life. And so then the first chapbook made from recycled materials is very much about putting myself back together again um, after questioning so many of the foundational beliefs that I had about love and loving. And so I think that's that. And then of course, the more political writing that I do, which is about like ethnicity and identity and healing, and some might even call it kind of conflict resolution.
Right, right. And what would you say motivates you to write? Like you mentioned healing. Would you say healing would be one of your motivations to write?
Yeah, yeah, I think that writing is a very personal healing process, but I also think that my academic background is political science, political theory, and philosophy. And toward the end of my undergraduate years, I wrote an honors thesis on identity formation and post-conflict narrative. And there were a lot of sort of theoretical conclusions that I came to, but perhaps the most important one is that academic work and theory work doesn't really get read by people. It gets read by academics. And so that led me to the further conclusion that in order to have real change in the world, we need the arts. We need to communicate through like public sculpture, public art, installation art, poetry, and we need to interact with other artists of other tribes in order to have that kind of the healthy ideas in our society. That very much motivates me. It motivates me to be one of those kinds of creatives and to build bonds and to encourage and foster growth with those kinds of creatives. That is to say, taking healthy, loving, constructive ideas and using poetry and the arts to make them a part of the way we live our lives and the ideas, right? It's always theory praxis. With bad theory, you have bad results. Good theory, it stands to reason, creates a better world. So I think that motivates me a lot.
Mm. Excellent, excellent. And who or what would you say helped you to develop your skills as a writer? Like would you say it's like one
Who?
person or several people,
Oh,
or is it certain resources? Like who or what would you say helped you to develop your skills as a writer?
yeah, it's definitely not one. I mean, it would be impossible to list all of the people that I have gratitude for. I think the sort of as a poetry facilitator with the Unfold, I think that for me, the easy answer would be that like the entire community inspires me and helps me grow. And that's very true. But along the way, especially when I was like young, super young, there was John Trigonis, who you may or may not know. I think he's definitely a mutual friend with many people here today. And John was the first person to take me to an open mic. Um, John Trigonis was really at my graduation at high school. He gave me a book, an anthology of poetry. It's right here. So this was John's gift at my graduation, and that had a really huge impact on me. By the way, he starred Walt Whitman's Captain, Oh My Captain, so I had to read that, and it became a part of my journey. I think that my grandmother is a big part of my poetry. I often talk about the fact that, you know, my grandmother grew up in a time like patriarchy is a thing, you know, it was an equal opportunity in these generations. And I think if she had had the privilege of going and getting an education, she'd be one of the best novelists of the last generation. She's a brilliant storyteller and writer. And because of, you know, the family and the conflicts that our families have been through, she was encouraged not to go to school because it was too dangerous for women to walk the streets. So my grandmother's influence was very strong. And then there are certainly certain, I mean, I'll stop there, but there are definitely poets that I've read that have impacted me. And just like all of us, you know, people we interact with.
Definitely, definitely. Now let's talk about like your role as a facilitator of the poetry unfold. For those that might not be familiar, can you share what the poetry unfold is about and you know all the details pertaining to that?
Yeah, the poetry unfold was an outgrowth of basically two things. One is that we were in a post-COVID society where I felt that a lot of we had all been in this like alienated world where we weren't really interacting with people very much. And I realized that in that sort of directly immediate post-COVID time, there were not a lot of opportunities to have interactions in public discourse, at least not in Union City, as far as I can remember. Now, what's interesting is that I wasn't the only person who was having this idea. Like we have Aurelia's in the audience, and we have a constellation of poetry spaces now. And it seems like we all kind of started around the same time, within months of one another. And so one of the motivations of the Poetry Unfold was to simply create a safe space. And Suki, who is the owner of Espresso at Park in Union City, asked me if I wanted to do a poetry thing at the coffee shop. And I said, sure, I would love to, because I had been suggesting that. And at that time in my life, I was very much, and still am, invested in drama therapy and intergenerational trauma work. And so I had been studying healing wounds of history, which is the modality that deals with intergenerational trauma through theater and the arts. And so that then became the kind of theoretical underpinnings of the Poetry Unfold. And it's like most open mics. There's a sign-up sheet. You go there, you read, you're part of this community. It's that in that way, it's the same. What makes it different is that there's a moderated open forum where the audience immediately brings the poetry to life. After each presentation, the audience interacts with the poet. And so that's what makes it slightly different. It's a kind of container, and the community holds that container together.
Excellent, excellent. Now you commented about the importance of the arts. Like generally speaking, how like in pertaining to yourself and your own, you know, poetic journey, how have the poetic arts, how has the poetic arts impacted your life?
I think personally, poetry has been, again, a place where I have come to work through some of the most difficult times in my life. Whether as in adolescence, it was just like free writing, and then it started becoming sitting and working with a poem until I felt that I had taken, it's a good time to share that I think when I write a poem and I think it's finished, I also typically have put down the thing that I was carrying until I wrote that poem. Like the creation of the art is a kind of a release, like a little bit of the weight of whatever I had been mulling over or had been holding space in my body or in my mind gets put on paper. And in that way, for me, it's a healing thing. It's also facilitating poetry has also made me a happier person because I've gotten to know some wonderful human beings that I wouldn't have met through without this community and without doing this work. So just going to events and being a part of that has introduced me to some of my favorite people, and I feel really grateful to poetry and community for that.
Excellent, excellent. Now let's talk about your upcoming book. Like how did you make the decision to do a book, and what has the process been like for you to put this book together?
So I have two forthcoming things. One was the one that was titled in the Made from Recycled. Kind of sounds like you're describing the materials the book will be constructed of, but that's actually the title, Made from Recycled Materials. That one deals with, again, the healing process in romantic relationships. The one that I'm really stoked on right now, though, is the second one. It's called Crooked Chair, or in Armenian, Zur Ator, Poems of Witness. And these are all poems that were written between 2020 and 2023, which is easily, I think, in my experience, 39 years, maybe the darkest, worst period I've ever witnessed in the world. And that poetry is all dedicated to witness and resistance. And I've been working on it day in, day out for the last 48 hours, so it's very fresh on my mind. I'd better shut up because I won't stop if I don't. Did I answer your question? Did I at least answer the question?
Yeah. I mean, it's awesome. I mean, because it takes a lot to pour into a project, and and I'm just curious as to like what emotions and ideas that were attached to putting this book together. Like why did you choose the particular poems that you chose for that project? Like what did those poems mean to you?
Testament to it being thank you for that great facilitation. That's exactly the question that I needed. I think that okay, so this book was essentially, it wrote itself in some ways. 2020 is when the Republic of Azerbaijan and the Republic of Turkey unleashed indiscriminate violence on the indigenous Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh. It was a genocidal war. It was asymmetrical, and it was tied to pan-Turkic ideology, fascist ideology, killed 5,000 people. This is a population of people. So outside of the Republic of Armenia, the Armenians of Artsakh were like one of the very last indigenous populations that were on their indigenous land of millennia after the genocide of 1915, where 1.5 million Armenians were massacred. So this was a very, very traumatic experience for me, particularly because I also am involved in political organizing. So when this crisis hit, and in order for it to be in perspective, you can think of Gaza now. What Armenians were experiencing in terms of like being aware that your people are being just slaughtered in the world, except there was zero media coverage, right? So there was some media coverage, but none of it was mainstream. So nobody knew what was going on. None of my progressive friends understood what was happening. And so I was doing advocacy work. One thing that made the Artsakh war atrocious is that Azerbaijani soldiers were making homemade recordings of decapitating, beheading, trigger warning of rape, tying up elderly people and mutilating them. There was an example of somebody lynched. There was one man who was muted on skewered on a pole and carried down the side of a mountain by two people. I have never seen this kind of content outside of studying historical genocides. And so I was very much witnessing these things. And on top of that, documenting them and doing advocacy work with the media, trying to get the media to publish stories about it. If you look at like Human Rights Watch, The Guardian, it has been written about, but nowhere near the amount that it should have been written about. So in my loneliness and trauma and frustration, I took to writing a lot. And as I started getting invited to feature and to be a part of different places, I would read these poems to bring attention and awareness. So a lot of my close friends in the poetry world will remember that during 2020, 21, 22, I was writing and reading a lot about conflict, particularly the suffering of the Armenians. And the last thing I'll say about this is that population that was under attack between 2020 and 2022 was subject to a blockade for a year, where humanitarian crisis was provoked, And at that point, Azerbaijan and backed by Turkey opened fire indiscriminately, killed another over 500 people, and opened the border. And these population of 120,000 Armenians fled into the borders of sovereign Armenia. Now they're ethnic Armenian, but they're not from that land. They're from Artsakh, from where they were ethnically cleansed. So even as the tire tracks were warm on the side of the mountain that they fled from, Gaza started. And it was, again, it's just one thing after another. Ukraine happened, Gaza is happening, and it's very much, again, ethnic cleansing. And so I never stopped then. I never stopped writing on the subject. And when I was thinking about putting together a chapbook, it became very clear that what I had was a lot of poems of resistance and witness. And I had just, because of my education and leanings, it's all very intersectional. So you'll find a lot of parallels with the Black Lives Matter movement. You will see that I'm talking about the civil rights movement. I'm talking about Emmett Till. I'm talking about the church bombing in Birmingham. So these are things that are, for me, opportunities to talk intersectionally about the global collective justice movement.
All right, that's excellent. That's very heavy, powerful material, and thank you for shedding light on that, because you mentioned some things, you know, that I didn't know about that was happening, and like you said, that's because, you know, mainstream media didn't give it any attention. So, you know, thank you for, you know, bringing that to light, because those things are definitely those things definitely need to be talked about and addressed. And, you know, those are things that, you know, people need to be aware of. So, you know, thank you for sharing that. It's heavy material, but it's definitely needs to be put out there for sure, for sure.
Thank you for receiving it, Noel. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, as far as your choice of how, you know, you put this project together, are you choosing to go the self-publishing route, or are you trying to get a major publisher involved? It's like, what avenue are you choosing, and do you have a preference?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, like, in today's world, that's very much a thought and a conversation. Like, how much of the profit do you think you are entitled to? And what kind of reach do you want to have? Maybe you want to think about, like, writing credentials as an author. There are so many ways to think about that. I think for me, the most critical issue with this particular project is time. In 2 years, it might not be timely anymore. And I think that it's important for this political writing and the messages that come out of it, particularly intersectional approaches to justice and liberation, come out in a timely way. So I am shooting high. I'm entering it in competitions. I will be submitting it to Button Poetry as one of them. There are a couple of others that I'll be submitting to. So for the next few months, I'll be submitting it into competitions. I will also probably continue refining it and submit it just, you know, normally to publications and publishers that I respect, particularly those who seem to be respecting progressive literature and literature about justice issues, social justice. So I'm going to do my best. And if at some point I decide that this hasn't worked out that way, then I probably will self-publish it, just because I think it's important that people read the material and have an opportunity to read it while it's very much hot, like relevant. Like, this is the iron, unfortunately, really deeply unfortunately, the iron is very hot on this subject. It's horrific. I think we're in a terrible moment of humanity.
Yeah. The times that we're in now are definitely unfortunate to contend with, but, you know, it takes poets like us that are brave enough to even put those subjects into the forefront, where people can actually see and read about it, you know, to be informed and to be enlightened and be educated, you know, because as I mentioned, you know, you mentioned those atrocities and those episodes of genocide that I was totally oblivious to. And I'm personally mortified that those things took place, but the fact that it wasn't even put out there on the mainstream just goes to show the importance of us as poets. If I'm not mistaken, Nina Simone said that the duty of an artist is to reflect the times. So
Yes.
when there's instances where the media doesn't do what they should do or what they could do, it's up to us artists, up to us poets to pick up the slack to talk about, these issues, things that pertain to the human experience. Like if you look at Maya Angelou or Nikki Giovanni, for example, their poetry spoke to the times that they were in. And even now, when you're reading the poetry, some of the stuff that they talked about, during the 50s or the 1960s, some of those issues are still being repeated today, which goes to show the importance of it goes to show the importance of books overall, because even after we're gone, the books will still speak for us. And when you're talking about subjects of this severity and of this importance, those words will go far beyond, reaching people even after we're gone. So the weight of our words, makes a difference, and to know that we're filling in the gap, to speak to those things is very important. And I see Aurelia mentioned in the chat, these subjects will forever be relevant, and your writing is timeless. And I'm in agreement. Your writing is timeless, and when you're speaking to these issues that are powerful, and you're provoking thought, you're getting people to think, you're bringing awareness to things that people may not have known on their own already. So you're moving in purpose for sure.
Yeah, if I could say a word about that, I think I'm in incredible agreement, an incredible amount of agreement. I think I want to say, like, even the poets that you've referenced are people that I admire immensely. And I think of Lawrence Ferlinghetti too, and his little tiny book, Poetry as Insurgent Art. Poetry is very much powerful. Like, there's never been a movement for peace or justice that hasn't had poetry involved. If you look at Gaza today, they're literally assassinating poets. I think there was something like 7 poets murdered in 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago. The Armenian genocide of 1915 began on April 25th, 1915, April 24th, 1915. And the reason why that is the significant marker and the symbolic start of the Armenian genocide is because the Ottoman Turkish authorities round up and arrested 250 intellectuals, poets, teachers, lawyers, community representatives, and then disappeared them. And so if you look at El Salvador, right? In El Salvador, you had the Jesuits who were murdered. And when they were murdered, their brains were smashed on the steps. It was basically a way of defiling intellect, defiling that which has the consciousness to rise against the military junta. And so as poets, I agree with you. Some of the poets that I admire the most are people who are standing up to the times. And Aurelia's point absolutely is relevant. However, I will add that as a student of genocide, the sad and the horrific thing is that people become aware of genocide when it's too late. Like, when people are bumper stickers, it's too late. And so when we study genocides historically, sure, it's good for our edification and our education, but it's not saving the lives. And when media fails to do its job in the moment, the consequences of that is that there's no deterrence. And with no deterrence, despots, fascist dictators, and leaders are emboldened to carry out atrocities. And these fascist ideologies get away with these atrocities because of the distortion. So poems of witness, I know that just like many other poets, my poems will witness atrocities long after I'm dead. Poems of witness stand up against erasure. They stand up against distortionism. And they essentially do not allow the complete success of fascism. And so I definitely feel that this is, I probably won't ever stop writing this kind of material, or hanging with people who do. Like, we need to stand up for what's right in the world. And poetry has always historically been a place of refuge for societies, embattled societies.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Now, is there one subject that you like writing about more than others, or do you feel like you just write how you feel, like whatever subject you feel to gravitate to? Do you have a preference of subjects, or do you feel like you just write about a variety? You try to write about a variety of different things?
When I was an undergrad, there's this brilliant, there's like never a moment that I won't take the opportunity to shout out Daniel Berrigan. Daniel Berrigan is a really important figure in American politics. He's one of two brothers, Daniel and Philip Berrigan, who famously burned draft card files during the Vietnam War. They were two of the first white priests to be part of the civil rights movement. They were on the cover of Time magazine for resisting the Vietnam War and starting the sort of Catholic witness to the Vietnam War. Dan was also a poet, a very prolific poet. He won the Lamont Poetry Prize in, I think, 1967 or 76, I can't remember. And he's got over 50 books. And at a lecture he was giving at St. Peter's University while I was there, he was asked, like why he keeps doing activism work or anti-war work. And I think he said that there are plenty of things I would like to do, but until we address these issues of weaponry and war, military industrial complex, everything else is endangered. So I use that to say, I would love to write endlessly about little finch birds chasing each other with little crumbs in their beaks and running and hiding underneath parked cars. And then the other ones showing signs of cognition and deciding, oh, wow, he's hiding there. So they go this way and they follow. Like these things that happen in nature that are so beautiful. I love writing about things like that. But I find myself obsessively writing about genocide and war and justice because everything is endangered. And so I find that like these little nuances in life are really fun and beautiful to write about. But I think the two topics I come to a lot is love, these extreme poles, right? Love and genocide are the two things, like it's horrible, but like I'm working on a kind of love collection, and then, a poem about genocide pops up, and I decide I'm not going to write that one. I'm focusing on this. And then I'm writing a genocide collection, and I think, oh, well, that'd be really lovely. No, I can't write that right now. So I find myself going back and forth, and I probably need to go to workshops and work on getting myself out of these ruts and having a little bit more agency. But this is what's been happening to me in the poetic process for the last 3 years.
Excellent, excellent. Now let's talk about representation for a minute, because I'm sure you've heard representation, the word representation thrown around in different circles for one reason or another. Now, based on everything that you talk about in terms of what you choose to write about, like overall, when it comes to your writing, how important is it to you to make sure that you're representing yourself in your totality through your writing? Whether you're talking about race, religion, ethnicity, education, life experiences, your manhood, all the things that make you who you are. How important is it to you that, when you're writing or, performing your work, that you're representing yourself in your totality?
A really good question. Well, yeah, clearly it's very important. It is important to me to represent myself in my totality, as you say. One of the reasons why I chose, particularly when it comes to poetry, to use my name in Armenian, Yetvart, which is how I was baptized. So I was baptized in the Armenian church as Yetvart, and my American birth certificate, I was born here, is Edward. They're just a translation of each other.
Right.
And by choosing Yetvart, I'm honoring the fact that, like, if any poetry comes through the tip of my pen, it's coming from my Armenian roots. Armenians have been writing poetry for thousands of years. And so whatever's coming through me is ancestry that goes back a lot further than 1984, the year I was born on this land. And so that's important to me. I think representation at this moment in my life means a lot of things. I love intersectionality. I think that it's really important for anybody who's involved in justice struggles to be aware of the experience of women around them, to be sensitive to the experience of people whose gender identification doesn't match theirs. I think certainly different ethnicities and different identities all have legacies of trauma, intergenerational trauma, and just like legacies of witness, things they've seen Being aware, the land that we're on right now is Native American land. The building that I grew up in Weehawken is built, research told me, on a Native American cemetery. So it's Lenape indigenous land. And so being aware of representation, even for those who can't really speak up for themselves right now, I think is important. And it's overwhelming. So we just do our best, knowing that we'll never be perfect. But right now, I have to say that representation for me is also the practice of not thinking of people as monolith, which is what, fascist, racist, genocidal entities tend to do. They dehumanize whole groups of people. And in so doing, it's very tempting as an activist, as an intellectual, to be like, well, these people are the problems. But look, I have plenty of progressive Turkish and Azerbaijani, well, I don't have Azerbaijani friends, but I do have Turkish friends. And I do know that there are Azerbaijani activists who are in jail protesting the war that decimated the Armenian people. 200 Russians were arrested the second day of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Thousands of Jews have been arrested to say "not in my name" in the wake of the Gaza crisis. Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Germany was killed for resisting the Nazis. Sophie Scholl was persecuted. So for me, representation also means recognizing the resistors and those who have challenged fascism from within, so that we don't have these dualistic ways that just kind of create perpetual antagonism, right? So representation is also that people are not one thing. Not all Jews are revisionist Zionists. And it's really important to remember that, because unless we remember that, we don't have healthy, sane ways of talking about really difficult things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's so on point. That's so on point. And that provides the perfect segue to the next segment, because now, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for Yetvart to take the mic. The crowd goes wild. Yes, yes, yes. So at this time, Yetvart, you have the opportunity to share up to 5 poems of your choice. You don't have to do 5, but I'm giving you space to do your poetry, to do poems of your choice, so our audience can get an idea of who you are and what your writing styles and subject matter is like. So at this time, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Noel, for this wonderful conversation. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm going to start with a heavy one. It's one that I've performed, but it's pretty representative of the conversations that we've been having. So I will go off. Here's Cheesecake in April, previously titled April 24th is the International Day of Remembering, and the day I had cheesecake at Boulevard Diner. Velvet folds, pleated pretty by the slick cut of my fork. I get better at it each time, smooth and creamy. I feel the sweet move and melt between my tongue and the roof of my mouth. I hear the fork touch the ceramic with each new cut. Over and over, velvet folds, pleated pretty by the slick cut of my fork. The tongue explores each new sensation. Sensuous. I wonder if there was any cheesecake in Izmir, in Yerzanka, in the village of Geve, vacant now like the strawberries I plucked off the top first. The pretty ones are always the first to be taken. A Vietnamese monk tells of how our lungs are the lungs of our ancestors. You breathe for them too. Now I think of my grandfather, how he would have loved this cheesecake. My tongue pushes the cream against the back of my teeth, the way they lined up innocent men against the wall before shooting them. My tongue pushes the cream against the back of my teeth and squishes it back onto my tongue, form unseen, like what might have become of their lives. This strawberry cheesecake is shaped by my experience before it's swallowed up and gone, like the million souls of a nation destined not to see their grandchildren. Hundreds of thousands were marched into the Syrian desert with a sun so hot it would have melted this cheesecake. And here I am, Kilich Artug, a leftover of the Turkish sword, because a young boy escaped that desert, because he made it into Syria, had bookkeeping skills, was able to forget his murdered mother and father quickly enough to endear himself to an Arab shopkeep on the outskirts of that desert. The dry desert with the sun so hot it would melt this cake. And here I am in a village called New Jersey, in an empire not Ottoman, marveling at how this dessert plays on my tongue and the difference one solitary S can make. In a language no one could have ever known, an Armenian seedling would need to learn how to sprout in, to blossom his heavy heart. Taste the moment. Taste the moment I try to think of Zen and how my mouth is not only my own. I taste the moment not only for myself, but for my elder too. He would have loved this cheesecake, and also for them. Them who never could have imagined the marvels of sugar, syruped and creamed, with cheese into fabricated flavor, splendor, topped with blood red drippings, drizzling and drooping down the sides of this decadent sweetness. Many of them were shot dead while sipping water from the Tigris River. The rivers ran red and dammed with bodies, cheesecake now, tasted by those who survived that uncertain March and April and May, to arrive 108 years later, every slice here a slice of guilt, every sweet a bitter sweet. Heru chertank, no need to reach, a grandma might say, even as I taste this cheesecake in North Bergen, New Jersey. A generation of Armenians are landlocked by sinister teeth, smiling Cheshire beneath leering eyes, waiting for us all to die. Between the lahma jun, dolma, baklava, and Adana köfte, with living breath appropriated, this taste is difficult to explain, but I do my best to stomach it. Someday, maybe I'll write a poem about what happened in Adana. For now, I hope it's true that we taste for others too, because they deserved to live the rest of their lives. Astfaz hokinit lusavore. May God rest their souls. Thank you. That was Cheesecake in April. And I just want to offer some perspective. The population that I referenced in this poem, at the end of this poem, where I said there's no need to reach, there's a generation now landlocked by sinister teeth, smiling Cheshire beneath leering eyes, waiting for us all to die. That is the population of 120,000 Armenians, indigenous for 4,000 years, that have been ethnically cleansed. So this poem was written in April of 2022. By the last time I performed it in October of 2023, when Gaza had just begun, this entire population had been vanished from their indigenous land. Thanks for receiving this poem. I can go on, or I can let this sit for a bit. Noel, what do you think?
Yeah, that was a powerful piece for sure. But you can proceed with the next poem when you're ready.
Okay, so I'm going now to bear with me. I'm telling you that this is happening, and now you're witnessing it. So now My wonderful partner is in here from Germany. And this is a poem that I wrote while I was with her in Germany. It's called Moment Serene. So I'm going to make this drastic leap and come back to you with something else. This is very much a poem about a certain precious moment and sort of settling into that moment. Moment serene. What is this? How to add word to word, make sense out of sensation, or the cessation of restless need. A stillness dimpled sweet. Your soft skin on mine feels like a kiss. Your breath beside mine moves like a dance. You smile nestled. Your smile nestled sideways along my length, our bodies puzzled, serene. I can feel your lips curl upward on either edge. Your eyes themselves cast smiles in slanted smirk or grin. You know it too, this whipped air, this full moon slumber on velvet sky, this sensation of certainty, of felicity with fate, ease like snowfall atop tall winter trees, salted lightly and settled. It's purity. Okay. The next poem that I will share, I'm now slipping back into the other side of my poetic spectrum. This is a poem that I wrote in 2023, and it is very much inspired, I think, by a good friend who's also been on this show, Robert Gibbons. I had an opportunity. Robert Gibbons is such a wonderful mentor and person in the poetry world. And so just shout out to Robert Gibbons for inspiring me to write this, and maybe even inspiring stylistically a little bit. But here's a poem called Ethnic Cleansing 2023, a cry for Artsakh, a cry for Gaza, cry for Artsakh for Gaza. 1 ounce of inspiration perspires from the tires as they grind and spin in my mind. That's all it takes to precipitate a piece predicated on the perils facing us at present. The burnt rubber incenses me. I try to waft it around so everyone else smells it instead of me, because I know the smell, I know it well. I know the waiting of the bell that never sounds. I know the screams will be drowned out soon. I know the baseball fan who cares more about his sauerkraut than that brown mother's shout or this orphan's pout. I know he will yell if the bun is stale, but never investigate what paying his taxes entails in wars. I know he'll swallow down sausages, but never witnessed human entrails poured out on the sides of roads. They said safe passage. They were death marches. They said safe passage. They were shot at if tired. Their dreams left their bodies as they sought souls in their shooters. Embers glow in the growing fires here. I can attest that we have come a long way. The test is surviving the moments after the heart's arrest. It beats, blood pumping through the chest of humanity. We want it to be different. We want morality. We want conscience to emerge. It's an emergency. Drowning down though we be, it's up to us only to emerge and see, emerge and see. They're dying, giving their last breath like a giant timber tree. Emerge and see, emerge and see. It's an emergency, begging for you to engage and emerge and say something, say something. The child cries and keep on saying it, keep wailing at the skies, keep soliciting eyes to see the truth hidden in plain sight. Tomorrow's headlines will be twice disguised until they are killed. Bones ground into past tense, spread like paste, spread like paste. Hold the pickles, mustard please, emerge and see, emerge, and it's an emergency. Mustard please, mustard please. That's always an interesting experience. Shout out to Soup Can magazine that picked up one of my pieces called Resilience. So I will not read that poem, but it is in the January issue, so it's a shameless plug and also a loving plug for a magazine that members of our community have been in. And please check out Soup Can magazine. The January issue will feature a poem by me called Resilience. And I think I will stop with a poem called Intersections. I think that brings me to 4, and I think that that's a good, this is heavy. I really thank you so much for receiving the subject matter. I know that it's hard to have this much poetry about this kind of thing. So I will try to offer you a piece called Intersections now in a way that I think maybe brings us together a little bit, and I will stop there. So here is Intersections. The ink from my pen for Artsakh is still wet when I start to write Gaza. At my desk, the words are a viscous pour like flowing blood. Blood doesn't drip or run like water, but moves softly into itself, spreading slowly, slowly touching more, covering more ground the longer it's left to spill. The more bodies, open-mouthed, are emptied into the air above like gasping fish with gaping rings, and sight slipping from their eyes. Like the air between us, the blood from Ferguson's Canfield Drive touches itself at Nisor Square as it turned the bend from Adana and Yerzenka to Auschwitz and Birkenau, before flowing along Al-Rashid coastline to itself again on the balcony of room 306 at the Lorraine Motel. The blood won't wash off the streets in Stepanakert, no matter what they're renamed. And the motel janitor knows why. The soil under the cement of Andranik and William Saroyan still tastes them, remembers them, whose births it once celebrated. Beneath the smiling sun and sky, whose footsteps tickled its sides, and whose untimely deaths it had to welcome home. If we were fish, our gills could help us understand viscosity. Help our eyes see the way blood expands and how much ground there is for us to cover. Thank you. That was Intersections.
Wow, wow, wow. Ladies and gentlemen, that was some powerful, powerful material from Yetvart S. Majian. Thank you so much for sharing that. The poetry was heavy, but it was powerful. It was on point. You spoke on things that needed to be spoken about, and I thank you for your transparency in being willing to sharing on those hard subjects. I for one personally am enlightened because you share things that I have no knowledge of whatsoever. And that's one of the goals of poetry too, to enlighten people to things that they may not know about, on their own already. So, thank you for sharing your insights, sharing your experiences, sharing on subjects that needed to be talked about. Thank you so much. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you. I'm checking out the I just realized that the comments.
Yeah. Peep the chat. You are getting mad love in the chat. There is mad love in the chat. Everybody's feeling you.
I appreciate it so much. I'm taking a moment to look through. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. Noel, thank you for the way that you receive, for the space that you create and curate. Thank you, everyone. I read a bunch of the comments. Thank you.
Awesome. So at this time, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna segue into the next portion of this episode. And we're going to dive right into the audience Q&A session. So at this time, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question or a comment for Yetvart, you can unmute yourself at this time and share your question or comment. Don't be shy, y'all. Don't be shy.
Not a question.
Hey,
I
SJ.
wish I could tea with everybody. I'm sorry that I'm not sure.
First of all, absolutely incredible. I know you as a poet and activist and ally, and you're just amazing in all those things. My question to you is, in being a witness and writing this kind of poetry, where does the trauma go? Does the trauma go your own trauma in being a witness? Does it go back in the poetry? Does it come from? How is that dealt with in dealing with these topics that need to get out? And how do you keep that trauma from eating you alive? And where does it go? How does it dissipate? How do you keep whole in this?
I think that trauma lives in our, I think that trauma lives in our bodies in ways that we can't always be aware of. And I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how I'm impacted by trauma. I know that I am. Like, there's the intellectual understanding of trauma, and then there's the experiential. And I think, like, through practices like sitting and different like practices, you can even get to a point of experientially realizing, oh, like, this is happening because there's this thing in me. But I also can't get to the bottom of it. I realize as I get older. So I think that it works itself out for me within a limited capacity through the poetry, and I just always have to work through things like, for example, like fear of unworthiness, right? Like, I feel like that has a lot to do with my childhood. It also has a lot to do with being raised by people who were fleeing genocides, right? So, like, there is a lot of ways that these kinds of things become decontextualized and you're left to deal with it. But I think that that's also not unique to that kind of trauma. Like, everybody deals with this. So I think that poetry community is a place where traumas can be worked out. Like, you find yourself a safe space and good friends, and you give yourself a boost and you say, I'm going to try this. And then at the end, you say, I made it, I did it. And then you take another step forward. So I don't know, SJ, if I'm answering your question. I probably need to think about this a little bit more, if I'm honest. But I think that there's two things. One is that the subject matter is a way of working my way through certain traumatic topics. Two is that the act of being engaged in poetic community and in being in solidarity. I should say solidarity. I think that's a really big part of how I don't let the trauma eat me alive, as you put it, right? Standing up for myself and for my people and my tribe, and then standing shoulder to shoulder with other people who are experiencing other examples of oppression. That solidarity, I think, is one way that we keep ourselves alive and we keep each other alive, because we all have different temperaments. And so it's harder for some to deal with certain kinds of situations than it is for others. So being in community means that we lend our strength to each other. And so I think I'll stop there. I think that's about as good an answer as I can give to that deep question.
Excellent. Thank you for that question, SJ. Anyone else have a question or a comment?
I have a question. It's nice to meet all of you. I've been trying to join for about 7 months now, and it never worked out with my schedule. Thank you for sharing your work. My question is, what suggestions would you have for someone such as myself who lives literally in a rural area where the nearest city, which would be Philadelphia or Baltimore, is 2.5 hours away, to find other creatives, to find other poets and start an open mic night or, something, because it's very lonely here. It's very lonely. I am 2.5 hours away from Baltimore and 2.5 hours away from Philadelphia. So there's no museums, there's no jazz clubs, there's nothing really.
Are there, by the way, how do I say your name? Helene?
T. Helene.
Helene, okay. Do you prefer Helene? Is that okay, or do I call
T
you
is
T?
fine, just T.
Okay, cool. T, are there any small coffee shops anywhere near you?
Uh, I would say a bakery that's kind of sort of like a coffee shop.
So I was hanging out with Danya in Germany, and I thought, like, if I was here, I would. There's a little tiny bakery, and it's not the kind of place where you would do an open mic. It's like a little German small town bakery. It's a wonderful space, but there are chairs there, and I'm sure there are 3 people or 2 people in that neighborhood who might be down to do poetry. So I would say just ask that bakery, hey, like, how do you feel about this? And maybe put up some like there are meetup groups. Oh, meetup might be a great opportunity, like using meetup to find other fellow writers. But also I would say there are so many things post-COVID now happening online. So being a part of these kinds, I know there's at least one other digital open mic, New York City Creative Expressions that I featured. That's actually Robert Gibbons is one of the facilitators of that. We can hook you up with that. And that way you can be plugged into digital community that will encourage, but then also like maybe you could do workshops online. And then when you have some material, you can take that 2-hour trip too, because in Philly, there are a lot of open mics. Like you're close to some hotbeds of poetry. So you can just kind of develop material and then go there with the express decision of performing if that's what you want to do. Maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you just want to write. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity in that way. Like we can become friends, and as opportunities come up, we can post them and share them with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question, T. And I'm not sure if I'll quote, you may be already connected to Poets with Purpose Facebook group. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so
That's also
as you scroll through the group, from day to day, there's various different posts about events or contests or what have you, in regards to events specifically. There are events posted from various different states or places. So one may pop up that might be close to you by chance. You never know. So it's good to just stay in the loop, to see what comes up. But definitely, be encouraged, to start something up where you are, because it's definitely possible. All it takes is, a couple of people, 2 or 3 people, to be willing to, take hold of that idea, and you never know how far it can go. So I encourage you, to just go for it and see how it plays out. And then in addition, there's other resources online that you can tap into as well. But, definitely take that into consideration. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, definitely second that. Also, like the old school method of making little flyers and putting them on bus stop phone poles and just saying like poetry open mic at the bakery. You'd be surprised. I think sometimes people are amazed at how many other people there are who want to be a part of this kind of thing. So good luck, and please let us know what happens. Come hang out with you and go to your open mic.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, that could be a question you pose to the group, because as of now, there's about over 400 members in the group. You never know. There might be some people that are in your area or close to your area that's currently in the group. So feel free to pose that question. You never know who will answer.
Okay. Thank you.
T, could you tell me again where you are exactly? That slipped my mind. Sorry.
I'm actually in Delaware, but in Sussex
Delaware.
County, Delaware, which is closer to Ocean City, Maryland than it is to Philadelphia. Yeah.
County. So if anything comes up, definitely let you know.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for that question, T. Anyone else have a question or a comment they'd like to share?
I have a question. Being that we're in the climate that we're experiencing right now, are you fearful of how your work will be received when it's out in the world?
I wouldn't say fearful. Apprehensive though, yeah, for sure. Concerned, yeah, definitely. There are a couple of pieces in my current chapbook that are, I call them interludes, and they're about interactions with Israeli friends. And I think that I was just talking with a dear friend of mine the other day, and we were talking about how like this could be misperceived. But having studied political science and always I studied social justice. I've been involved in like progressive politics for a while. I remember being an undergrad and like having repercussions for writing research papers that professors thought were not good, but not, the content was fine, but they just didn't like the opinion that I had come to or the conclusion I had come to. And I remember, or being at an academic conference and trying to be shut down because I had an opinion that was not in at that moment, because they were suppressing something. So I think I've been around it enough that it's, at this point, it's a part of the way that I live my life. I know that I can't please everyone, and that no matter how much I try to be empathetic and compassionate for as many people as possible, there will be people who are harboring ideologies that do not allow them to receive what I have to say or the position that I have to take. And so I recognize that's just kind of a part of Dan Berrigan. There he is again. He said, "Know where you stand and stand there," and that's a practice. That's a practice. Know where you stand and stand there, and it's hard. So yes, the answer to your question, Aurelia, is for sure. I'm a little apprehensive about how this collection would be received, but I also think that we're living in a time where it's time to admire people who stood up, and it's time to be more like them rather than to admire them from afar. I think that we should take lessons from the past and recognize that we should speak while something's happening, not only after it's done. And I know that, I'm lucky to be in community with a lot of people in this room, even who are open and holding container and space for difficult things. So I think it's a time where, I don't know. I I don't know. I don't want to be pushy, but I think like we all need to just be a little bit bolder right now. Lives depend on it. And that's how I feel.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Aurelia, for that question. There's time for at least one or two more questions for the audience. Is there anyone else that hasn't shared yet that would like to give a question or a comment before we close out?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah, I'll do one.
Doug, Cap,
So,
what's up,
yeah,
bro?
how you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah,
Good.
I have a
Good to see
question.
you.
What are your greater goals for the Unfold and for yourself professionally and personally in the creative arts in the upcoming, I mean, beyond your chapbooks and stuff, like in a community organization way, like what are your forthcoming initiatives that you plan toward actualizing?
I think there are a lot of things I'm really excited about. I think that when it comes to organizing literary organizing, I'm one to take cues from the community that I belong to, the communities that I belong to, where I feel that I am encouraged to do things and supported. That shows me that this is a thing that like has a purpose beyond my imagination. Outside of my head, it's a good idea when other people get involved. So I'm going to follow the cues from my community in terms of what we'll be doing at the Poetry Unfold. For now, it's still a weekly safe space open mic. I will continue that. And I do have a vision for kind of helping to continue. So one of the things that Poetry Unfold does, as you know, Doug, is that it also brings groups of New Jersey poets at a time to a New York City open mic. And I'm looking to expand that, right? So that we have a nice pathway for our local poets to start expanding and working their muscles and getting different audiences and constantly keep cross-pollinizing maybe with poetry. That's something that I see myself being involved in for a while to come. But I think I'm also going to continue focusing on my own growth as a writer. So I'm going to continue writing and trying to push my work out, frankly, following the lead of people like you, Doug, getting better at putting my poetry out and sending them out to anthologies and journals and magazines and working on craft. More to say, but we can talk about the rest. I think that's
Cool.
Thanks, Sergio.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Douglas, for your question. All right, y'all, we have time to squeeze in one more question or comment for Yetvart before we close out. So as anyone else would like to give a question or comment before we close? All righty, if no one else, Yetvart, are there any events you have coming up or anything else you'd like to make our audience aware of before we close?
There are, like I said earlier, there are so many wonderful poetic things happening in our growing community. Shout out to the Washington Park Association for choosing me as their inaugural poet in residence. So I will be poet in residence at Washington Park. My tenure is 1 year. I think that the official announcement is coming this week, next week. I will be putting together 2 events there. I'm looking to pillars within our community like Aurelia, SJ, and other organizers. I know that Doug is very much a part of our scene as well. So Doug will be hopefully a part of it. I want help, and I want us to do it together to do 2 public events at Washington Park. There's that, look out for that. Soup Can Magazine, they're having a big party to release their January issue. And then please, I would just say, get to know some of the wonderful facilitators in our community. The Way series once a month, the Poetry Unfolds, Aurelia's open mics. There are so many. I'm sure that I'm forgetting people and I apologize to them. But if you follow me on Instagram, I'm constantly posting about things that I'm doing and that friends are doing. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Noel, thank you for your generosity of spirit and your capacity to hold a wonderful container. I appreciate you.
Thank you, thank you. And then just for reference, can you repeat your Instagram handle and any other social media that you might have?
Yeah, so some of my political nonviolence work, social work is at Armenian Nonviolence. The poetry facilitation work is at The Poetry Unfold, THE, The Poetry Unfold. And my personal Instagram is Majian, EMAJIAN on Instagram. And I do check my DMs and love to correspond. So
Excellent, 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 excellent. So at this time, ladies and gentlemen, before I close out this episode, is just one more little thing that I need to do. Well, the little thing that's not so little, and that is to say thank you. First and foremost, thank you, Yetvart. Powerful, powerful poetry. I mean, I can't really find any other word to describe it. I mean, it was powerful. It was on point, heavy subject matter, but, very thought-provoking subject matter, very important subject matter. Thank you so much for your transparency and your honesty and your bravery and willingness to tackle these subjects in poetic form. Thank you so much for sharing your gift. I wish you all the best in your future endeavors, and I want to congratulate you on everything that you've accomplished up until this point. Very, 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 very excellent work that you have, and very inspiring. You've inspired me, and I'm sure you've inspired our audience and anyone else that will watch this episode in the future. Thank you so much for your time and your talents. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you for being my guest. And next up, for episode number 12, we have a poet by the name of B Moore coming through to do his thing on Monday, January 22nd, 2024 at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, for more information about Poets with Purpose and the PWP Sessions podcast, you can call me at 646-372-6230, or you can email me at poetswithpurpose@gmail.com. Any poets or rappers or MCs interested in being a future guest on my podcast, you can just send me an email and we'll work out selecting dates and times to do so. All of my logos and flyers were designed by the excellent team at Eclipse Graphics. You can find them on Instagram at @SignEclipseGraphicsNY to check out samples of their work and reach out to them if you have any projects you would like them to handle for you. Lastly, for those of you that are interested in making a donation, you can do so through PayPal, Tap Media Man, Cash App, $Anointed Pen, or through Zelly utilizing my phone number. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a wrap for episode number 11. This episode will be uploaded to the Poets with Purpose YouTube channel within the next hour or so, so be on the lookout for that. And, once it's posted, you're free to share on all of your social media networks as you're at your choosing. So with that, Yetvart, thank you so much for coming through and being my guest. A big thank you to my audience. And thank you to those who donated. I appreciate your support. Have a good evening and God bless and all the best in your future endeavors. Thank you so much, y'all. Have a good night.